So students, before we start talking about color, we need to talk about value. Value is more important than color. Value is the substance of how we see. We could probably live in a world where we only saw things in black and white and we would do fine, because really the way that we perceive things three-dimensionally is its lightness and darkness. Now with color, when you use color, you want to use it in the same way that you use value. You need to try to match the tonal range. That being said, there are a lot of fascinating things about color that we're going to learn. Some basic color theory. Some of this stuff you're going to be able to apply to your drawings. It'll help just inform what you do. It's not going to all translate exactly. I don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that you're going to make a yellow and purple painting or a red and green painting. That's not exactly how it works, but just know that with subtractive color mixing, the kind of mixing that we do with pigments, paint, pastels, anything that most traditional art materials are, you have to consider the color wheel. So in nature, there's three colors that happen naturally, and they cannot be mixed: yellow, red, and blue. Those colors need to be found either in a mineral or in plants or however, but they just need to be found naturally. The first set of colors that can be made by mixing those two colors are the secondaries. So yellow and blue make green, blue and red make violet, and red and yellow make orange. Now the fascinating thing about this, something that artists for some reason have discovered, this sort of physical phenomenon that happens in your eyeball. So when you have blue, the complementary opposite, the color that happens just on the other side of the color wheel, is orange. Those are the complementary colors. With red, the complementary color is green, and with yellow, the complementary color is violet. And this is a very fascinating thing. It's something that it's just very interesting, and it's something that you'll want to keep in the back of your head. These colors do really strange things together. They're almost like an acid and a base. They couldn't be more opposite. When seen by side, they're very, very vibrant, but when mixed together, they tend to neutralize each other. And it's a great way of mixing more natural looking colors. Because when you use pigments, you're not going to just take your pastels straight out of the box and start coloring in your picture. You're going to be mixing. You're going to be adding layers. You're going to be enhancing the colors and shifting the range. Add a little red to orange to make it more red-orange. Add a little green to blue to make it more blue-green. You'll do things to shift the colors. So just to illustrate, complementary colors seen side by side are incredibly electric and very, very harsh almost to the eyes. They're very bright. Just to even illustrate this even more on a biological level, I would like you to look at the middle of this flower while I explain the story. One time when I was a kid, I went skiing with my parents, and being out there in the snow, I had these amber glasses on, and I wore them all day. They were supposed to cut the sun or whatever. So these amber colored goggles, which is essentially kind of an orange color. So I'm wearing these amber colored glasses all day, and as soon as I took those glasses off, everything in the world, all the snow, all that white snow, was blue. It was the weirdest thing. I couldn't understand why. It's something where the cones of your eyes need to rest. And so it picks the complementary opposite. Another weird phenomenon where you see that is, when you're let's say in an industrial bathroom, you have these harsh green lights, these harsh sort of blue-green lights. If you look down at the color of your shadows, they're almost the complementary opposite. They're usually reddish or orange. Now, if you were out at the beach and it was sunset, you have this magnificent sort of peachy colored orange sunlight coming down. If you looked at the shadows there, all the shadows that are being cast by your friends or the foliage or whatever you see, those are usually blue to blue violet. It's like the complementary opposite of the type of light source. And that's something that artists have used and sort of banked on, like sort of that extra vibrancy to enhance the visual effect of their paintings. So in this one, we have a complementary combination that's pretty obvious. There's red and there's green, right? It just sort of adds something. It's a little off red and it's a little off green. They're a little more natural in color, so it's not so absurdly like assaulting to the eyes. But it does give it a visual pop. That crab definitely stands out much more against the background. It almost becomes like a game. When you start looking at paintings, you'll start realizing that this is being used quite often. It's just a very tried and true trick. So in the background here, we have blue sky. And what's the complementary opposite of blue? Right, orange. You see it all in the ground, all here, and even in some of the bricks. But we also have another set of complementary opposites. We have violet, kind of here, and in the shadows there's violet, and maybe even in the water some, and there's a lot of yellow also on the bridge and in this timber up here on top of the bridge. Can you spot the complementary opposites in this one? The wood of the bed, it looks pretty much orange, and the walls are painted blue. The floor is mainly green with some red in the bedding. Another example, the fruit has some reds, they have some yellows, and the surrounding part of the still life has greens, violets, and blues, complementary opposites of yellows, reds, and oranges. This one's quite electric, has a lot of like sort of color bouncing all over the place. Over here, you see a yellow pastel. Notice how there's green cast here and there's red cast here. Those are complementary opposites. Over here, this yellow pastel, which doesn't have the green cast, has a violet over here. The complementary opposite of yellow is purple. So you have purple and yellow. Over here, you have a green pastel. And if you look really closely, there's little bits of red peeking through. There's all this usage of these complementary colors to sort of enhance the visual effect. It makes it more, I don't know, just striking to the eyes. Here you have green, and then there's little bits of red poking through down here. Now, almost more importantly, is to think about how these colors neutralize one another. And this is going to become really important if you use, like, let's say, watercolor, or when you're using your pastels and you're trying to mix, let's say, a deeper shade of yellow. You want to make that yellow darker. Sometimes the first instinct is to add black, but black will just ruin your yellow. It'll destroy it. It'll turn into some really nasty looking green. Instead, use the complementary opposite. By adding violet to your yellow, it starts to deepen and darken the color. Now, in theory, if you have two complementary opposites that are perfectly opposite each other, and sometimes you can find these like by chance, not necessarily in your pastel kit, but maybe you have two tubes of paint that just happen to be really, really perfectly matched to each other. You can mix them together and, in theory, get a perfect chromatic gray. And if not, something that's close. And it's a great way to make shadows that aren't overly saturated in color, but yet chromatic enough and enough dark enough to seem like a gray color. Again, just playing this game, in this painting, we have a yellow guitar and a violet dress. Over here we have some sort of green pants and rusty red, essentially. Now, complementary colors are not the only type of color scheme that's used in painting. Oftentimes there's a lot of different ways of going about it. Color is truly interesting and tricky thing to play with. And the only way to really come up with combinations that you like is just by practicing and playing and experimenting. Doing those things will give you sort of a palette that you enjoy yourself. But notable ones, besides complementary, are primary color schemes. And that's where you just use colors that are straight out of the first primary colors of the color wheel. You have red, yellow, and blue. This color combination is often seen in older, like religious paintings from the Renaissance, all the way to cereal boxes, you know, when you go to this grocery store. Those colors tend to really draw the eye. And so in this painting, you can see this person's in a red garment. Down here we have blue. And over here, for some reason, this guy's skin is totally yellow. How strange. Additionally, you can see complements in this. Over here, this piece of fabric the man's pulling over his head is violet. Over here we have green, which complements the red. And then you see orange, which complements the blue. Another type of color scheme often used is called analogous. And those are colors that all happen to kind of group together near each other on the color wheel. So rather than having colors that sort of complement, they have colors that sort of huddle together. And it really is a good way of sort of creating a mood. So if you want a warm colored painting, you'd pick colors all from the warm side of the color wheel. Or you could pick colors that were all mostly from the cool side of the color wheel. Color is also very affected on what it's painted on. A lot of times painters actually put a base layer color down, oftentimes like something like burnt sienna or yellow ochre. These colors kind of help represent the way that we naturally see. Like yellow ochre kind of represents the warmth of the sun. The burnt sienna that you see here, kind of the warm reds of the earth, right? That way, when you add your color on top, you don't have these pesky little bits of white poking through, because white can really be dominating. It can, unless that's part of the aesthetic that you're going for, white can overshadow the color that you're trying to use. So it's better to sort of avoid white and paint on a toned ground. For our mural assignment that we were going to do, we were going to work on the postal wrap, which is a nice neutral brown color. And that way, as you worked, you would let that brown be part of the painting. Additionally, going back to the idea of value, when you look at this, you can see that you can use those neutral tones as a way to create the value under part, the sort of the meat of the painting, which then you can add color to over the top. You can start to define the lights and darks and pre-plan the painting in that sort of visual sense of light and dark before even adding color. Here's a Toulouse-Lautrec, and again, just for fun, you know, we can look at the complementary colors. He's sort of working on a ground that's a bit on the yellow side. And what are the complements? Here you see violets, and also some sort of canary yellow here. So yellow and violet. But also back here we have red and we have green. Now, because these colors are more transparent, the color underneath is coming through, and so we're getting sort of an optical blending. The red is being affected by the yellow underneath and sort of making it slightly reddish orange. And the green is being affected too because of the yellow coming through. Yet we still have the idea that it's red and green. On the other hand, you can go with really vibrant colors underneath. This is Sean Griggs. He oftentimes underpaints his paintings with this really bright red color. It adds something to his sort of natural colors that he uses on top. He often paints oceans and landscapes and things that are outside, and those cool blues and greens really are affected by the red that's coming through. and enhances and makes everything a little bit more stunning, more electric. You can see this in other types of California-based painters that would do these landscapes, and they would paint on these like orangey red backgrounds, and then add the colors of the blues and the greens of the water and the grays, all colors by themselves that would be probably pretty drab and boring to look at, are look a lot more exciting with these little hints of orange coming through. Now, finally, we want to talk about perceived color versus local color and what those actually mean. So one of the things that you're going to train yourself to do, just like when you were looking at value, the more you did it, the more you looked, the more you were able to perceive subtle variations from light to dark. That was something that you got better at the more you did. And the more you do, the better you're going to be able to match those tonal values. The same thing is with color. You start training yourself to look for the sort of perceived colors that start to happen. That's what make good artists great artists, essentially, is their ability to start recognizing when light is warm versus when light is cool, when shadows are more orange versus when shadows are more blue, or if there's green tints in skin, or yellow highlights, things like that. Just really trying to perceive and see and match and show that you're seeing those colors in your work. So with perceived color versus local color, we talk about the color that something is. That's the local color. So for example, if you're wearing gray pants or a black t-shirt, those are the local colors. Okay? Perceived color is how those colors appear under different lights. So a good example of this would be, say you were wearing a white t-shirt. Okay, I know technically white is not a color, but just bear with me. A white t-shirt. Okay, and then you wear that into some, I don't know, some nightclub or something that has black lighting, I don't know. And what color does that shirt appear? It's much different. It's this weird indigo, glowing blue, purple. It's going to look much different. And that's the perceived color. So lighting has a lot of an effect. So look at this slide and just pretend that you're looking at a real landscape, right? You have this valley, it's sort of bathed in light. There's some cinder block, circle things, donuts up front. And off in the distance, you have this sort of hazy blue. It's because of atmospheric perspective, things kind of get fuzzed out and they get more of a blue tint over space. So the artist here is laying down almost the perceived colors first. So the valley is all bathed in sort of this yellow warm light. There's warm earthy oranges here. But then what are the complements? You see violets for the shadows, especially up here in these cinder blocks. Notice the yellow light here, and then the violet that's in the shadows. And also notice that back here, we were talking about sort of blue haze and atmospheric perspective. There's a bit of a blue being laid down here. And that's going to affect when you add your secondary layer of colors. You start working on top of that. So you start adding the local color. So cinder blocks obviously aren't yellow and purple, but you start adding sort of the gray tones that a cinder block would be on top of those yellows, and they sort of meld together and mesh and start making a natural looking image, something how your eye perceives. Also the grasses that are being laid over the top of the yellows, the greens on top of the yellow, and then the greens in the background that seem to be hazy. I think there was one more slide to this. I can't find it, but there was one more that shows this even in more completion. But you get the idea that when doing a painting or a drawing or a pastel in color, it's in layers. You add layers of color, and it sort of optically blends. Skip that one. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the assignment. I mean, the slideshow is great. It's really just about talking about color theory. However, a lot of this is going to be taken with a grain of salt. Like you you're going to try to interject this into what you're seeing, but mostly what you're going to be doing is trying to match the colors that you actually see.